Summer 1940. Europe belongs to Adolf Hitler. In less than a year, German forces have crushed every army that stood against them. Warsaw burned in weeks. Copenhagen surrendered before lunch. Paris, the city that held firm for 4 years in the last war, fell in 42 days. The German war machine seems unstoppable. Every border crossed, every battle won, every prediction proven right. But there's one nation left, one small island that should have already given up. Britain stands alone across the English Channel. Its army barely escaped from the beaches of Dunkirk, leaving behind mountains of weapons and vehicles. Its allies are gone. Its cities will soon burn. By every measure that matters, Britain has already lost this war. Yet somehow nobody told the British. The calculation. In Berlin, the military planners study their maps with satisfaction. The numbers tell a clear story. Germany controls the strongest military force ever assembled. Over 3.5 million soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft. The entire industrial output of conquered Europe now feeds the German war effort. Against this, Britain fields an exhausted air force and a shattered army. The math is simple. The outcome appears certain. General Franz Halder writes in his private notes that Soviet forces are poorly led and outdated in tactics. Colonel General Alfred Jodl tells colleagues that the Eastern campaign will prove easier than France. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, already discusses reassigning air units to other fronts by autumn. These are not foolish men. They've won every campaign they've planned. Their confidence comes from real victories, not empty boasting. But they're about to learn something their training never taught them. Some things can't be calculated on paper. The leader nobody wanted. May 10th, 1940. Winston Churchill takes control of a government on the edge of collapse. He's 65. His own political party doubts him. Many view him as reckless, a man whose judgment failed before and might fail again. The situation he inherits looks hopeless. German armies are tearing through France. The British forces sent to help are being surrounded. Senior officials quietly suggest that perhaps terms should be discussed. Surely some agreement can be reached. Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, raises the possibility of exploring what peace might look like. Churchill listens to these voices. Then he makes his position clear to the cabinet, to Parliament, to the nation. His message contains no room for doubt. Britain will fight. Victory remains the only goal worth pursuing, regardless of the cost or the length of the struggle. Without victory, nothing else matters. In German intelligence offices, translators work through the speech, searching for hidden meanings. Surely the aggressive language masks a willingness to negotiate. Surely this is theater for the British public while real discussions happen quietly. They find no such signals because none exist. Admiral Erich Raeder understands what others miss. He tells Hitler directly that invading Britain would require complete control of the skies and seas, and that landing over 250,000 troops in the first wave against the Royal Navy would be catastrophic without total air dominance. Hitler dismisses the concern. There won't need to be an invasion, he explains. Once France collapses, once the British people see their true situation, they'll replace Churchill with somebody reasonable, somebody who understands reality. The miracle that wasn't enough. Early June 1940. Against impossible odds, over 300,000 troops escaped from Dunkirk. The press calls it a miracle. Hitler calls it exactly what it is, a devastating defeat. Yes, the men survived, but the British army left behind everything else. 2,400 artillery guns, 68,000 vehicles, 77,000 tons of ammunition, an army without weapons. Churchill speaks to Parliament again. German analysts listen carefully, certain that now the preparation for surrender will begin. Instead, they hear a promise to fight on beaches, in streets, in fields and hills. A vow that Britain will never surrender. Heads shake in Berlin. The man must be playing politics. Real negotiations will come through private channels. They don't. France requests an armistice on June 18th. The agreement is signed 4 days later. Germany now commands territory from the Arctic to the Spanish border, from the Atlantic Ocean to Poland's eastern edge. Britain has no remaining allies. Its army is broken. Its air force, though intact, faces much larger numbers. On July 19th, Hitler addresses the Reichstag in Berlin. He speaks of reason and common sense. He positions himself as the generous victor, willing to prevent further bloodshed. He doesn't demand Britain's surrender. That would be crude. He simply points out the obvious facts. Britain has lost. Continuing this fight serves no purpose. Let us end this war, he suggests to the world. The speech broadcasts globally. In Germany, people hear it as a noble gesture from their leader. Surely now the British will accept reality. 3 days pass. Britain's response comes not through diplomatic channels, but through a public broadcast. Lord Halifax delivers the answer. Rejection. Complete, final, contemptuous rejection. No negotiations with Hitler's Germany. Not now, not ever. In Berlin, genuine confusion spreads. Hitler had been certain that this time the British would see sense. Instead, they've chosen madness. The plan nobody believed would be needed. Reluctantly, Hitler issues Directive No. 16 on July 16th. The language reveals his thinking. Since England shows no signs of willingness to come to terms despite her hopeless military situation, preparations for a landing operation will begin. Notice the phrasing, if necessary. This remains a backup plan for a scenario that shouldn't actually happen. Staff officers begin calculating what an invasion would require. The numbers shock them. The first wave needs 260,000 men. They need 1,700 barges, 1,600 motorboats, 470 tugs, 155 transport ships. These vessels must be gathered from across occupied Europe, converted for war, brought to channel ports, loaded with troops and equipment, and launched across water Britain has controlled for centuries. All while the Royal Navy and RAF try to sink them. The crossing alone would take hours. Unprotected hours. Then comes the landing, the fighting, the supply lines across hostile water. Each requirement reveals new problems. Admiral Raeder presents his assessment on July 31st. His expression is grim. The German Navy cannot guarantee safe passage against the Royal Navy. Not unless the Luftwaffe achieves complete air superiority first. Not just superiority. Total domination. Every major British airfield must be destroyed. The RAF must be swept from the skies entirely. Only then, maybe, could an invasion proceed. And even then, the risks would be enormous. Hitler turns to the man who has never failed him. The man who delivered Poland and France. Hermann Göring. Göring is 47 years old, and he commands the largest air force in the world. He radiates confidence. Why shouldn't he? The Luftwaffe has dominated every battle. Against Poland, against France, against the Low Countries, German air power proved unstoppable. Göring sees not a challenge but an opportunity for glory. He makes his promise to Hitler. 4 days. 4 days of good weather to destroy British air defences in southern England. 4 weeks at most to achieve total air supremacy. The RAF is exhausted, he claims. They lost heavily over France. They can't match German production or numbers. Break their fighter force and Britain becomes defenseless. The invasion proceeds. Churchill falls. The war ends. Göring sets the date. August 13th, 1940. Eagle Day, the day the Luftwaffe will begin the destruction of the Royal Air Force. One more attempt at reason. Before the bombs fall, Hitler tries one final appeal. On August 1st, millions of leaflets are prepared. The title reads, A Last Appeal to Reason. German bombers will drop them over Britain. The text is remarkable in its tone. Hitler presents himself not as a conqueror, but as a reluctant warrior forced by British stubbornness to continue a war he'd rather end. He lists his peace offers. He claims he sought accommodation. He positions Germany as the victim. Surely, the thinking goes, when ordinary British people read this, they'll pressure their government to negotiate. The leaflets are dropped. The British response comes not from the government, but from the people themselves. Some use them as toilet paper. Others turn them in for scrap paper recycling drives. One local government offers them as prizes at a garden show, raising money for the war effort. The BBC mentions the leaflets in passing with barely hidden mockery. This is not the response Hitler anticipated. The attack begins. August 13th, 1940. Eagle Day arrives. The Luftwaffe launches nearly 1,500 sorties against targets across southern England. Airfields, radar stations, ports, everything supporting British air defence. The Germans lose 45 aircraft. The RAF loses 13 fighters. This is not the ratio Göring predicted. Still, it's early. The campaign continues. August 15th sees the largest Luftwaffe operation yet. 2,000 sorties. Massive formations designed to overwhelm British defences. The Germans lose 75 aircraft. The RAF loses 34. Something is wrong. The British fighters keep appearing. Airfields that should be destroyed are operational the next day. Radar stations prove remarkably difficult to knock out permanently. And the British pilots fight with a ferocity that surprises even veteran German airmen. Göring doesn't understand. His intelligence reports say the RAF is down to its last few hundred fighters. They should be running out. Where are these Spitfires and Hurricanes coming from? How are British factories, supposedly battered by bombing, producing more aircraft than they lose? How are pilots, supposedly exhausted and demoralized, continuing to throw themselves at German formations with such determination? The questions multiply because the assumptions were wrong from the start. British fighter production isn't collapsing, it's accelerating. Lord Beaverbrook, that's the Minister of Aircraft Production, has turned aircraft manufacturing into a national crusade. Factories hit record output. Damaged aircraft get repaired and returned to service within days. The Germans estimated Britain could produce perhaps 200 fighters per month. In August 1940, British factories deliver over 470. The intelligence failure is catastrophic, and the pilots themselves. Göring assumed that after Dunkirk, after losses over France, the RAF would be scraping together whatever pilots remained. Instead, pilots from Poland, Czechoslovakia, France, from across occupied Europe have made their way to Britain. They fly British aircraft now, but with the fury of men defending their last hope. Some of the best pilots in the RAF are Polish, flying with skill and aggression that shocks the Luftwaffe. Then there are the British themselves. Young men, many barely 20, flying 4, 5, 6 sorties a day. So exhausted they fall asleep during landing approaches. But who keep climbing back into their cockpits? They're outnumbered. They're exhausted. But they are, absolutely, categorically, not breaking. The fatal shift, September 7th, 1940. Göring changes strategy. He's frustrated. The fighter airfields should be destroyed by now. They're not. So he does what air commanders do when ground targets prove difficult. He shifts to cities. The Blitz begins. That afternoon, 348 German bombers, escorted by over 600 fighters, attack London. The docks burn. Residential areas are hit. Nearly 450 civilians die. The raids continue night after night. London, then other cities. Coventry, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester. The theory seems simple. Break civilian morale. Force the government's hand. Surely people being bombed in their homes will demand peace. Surely Churchill, faced with public outrage, We'll have to negotiate. They're almost entirely wrong. The bombing doesn't break morale. It hardens it. After the first raids, there's shock, then fury, then determination. Churchill walks through bombed neighborhoods. He sees destroyed homes, bodies being pulled from rubble, survivors filthy and exhausted, staring at the ruins of their lives, and he hears them say, over and over, in different ways, "Give it back to them. We can take it. Don't let them win." The British people, it turns out, respond to being bombed not with surrender but with rage. And while Göring focuses on cities, he makes a fatal error. He gives the RAF fighter bases breathing room. Those airfields, which were genuinely on the brink of collapse in early September, get repaired. Squadrons get rest. New pilots arrive. When the Luftwaffe bombers come loaded with explosives for civilian targets, they're still escorted by fighters, but now those fighters have to range farther, spend more time over England, burn more fuel. The odds shift slowly but steadily toward the defenders. The knockout blow that failed. September 15th, 1940. The Luftwaffe launches what it intends as a final, decisive blow. 2 massive waves, each with over 100 bombers and heavy fighter escort, target London. The British scramble every available fighter. In the air battles that follow, RAF pilots are everywhere. Germans report the skies full of Spitfires and Hurricanes, far more than their intelligence says should exist. Claims of enemy aircraft destroyed go wild on both sides. That night, the BBC announces 185 German aircraft were shot down. The actual number is 56. Still devastating. The RAF loses 29 aircraft, but most pilots survive. Churchill visits RAF 11 Group headquarters during the battle. He watches as every squadron marker moves from available to engaged. He turns to Air Vice Marshal Park and asks quietly, "What other reserves have we?" Park replies, "There are none." That's how close it is. But close isn't collapse. The British are still flying, still fighting, still somehow winning. The admission, September 17th, 1940. Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion. The announcement uses careful language about weather conditions and strategic considerations. In reality, everyone in the German High Command knows what it means. It's not happening. Not this year. Probably not ever. For the first time since this war began, Germany has failed to achieve a strategic objective. The invasion of Britain is quietly shelved. The barges begin dispersing from channel ports. Some are struck by RAF bombers. Others return to civilian duties. The sense that the Wehrmacht simply cannot be stopped. That aura of German invincibility cracks. Not shattered. Not yet, but cracked. The Blitz continues through winter and into spring 1941. But it's no longer part of an invasion plan. It's just bombing, destructive, deadly, but no longer aimed at a specific strategic goal. So the Luftwaffe loses aircraft and crew in numbers that cannot be easily replaced. British production continues. American supplies begin arriving under Lend-Lease. The Royal Navy rules the Atlantic, or at least contests it. And Britain, impossibly, fights on. Still alone, but fighting. The new plan, June 22nd, 1941. Over 3 million German troops cross into Soviet territory. Behind them, 3,600 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, 2,700 aircraft, the largest invasion in human history. In command centers from Norway to North Africa, the mood is confident, almost euphoric. The Soviet military is primitive, they say, leadership purged, tactics predictable. The question isn't whether Moscow will fall, but when. August, September at the latest. Poland took weeks. France took 6 weeks. Though this will be done by autumn. The logic seems unassailable once again. If Britain won't surrender, if invasion is impossible, then the strategic situation must be changed by other means. The Soviet Union has always been the ultimate target. With Britain isolated, with no prospect of a Western ally, this is the moment. Break the Soviets. Control Russia's resources. Then, from a position of absolute dominance, Britain will have to accept reality. But as those armies cross the border, as tanks roll and artillery fires, there's something the German generals don't quite understand. Something they witnessed but didn't process. They saw Britain lose everything in June 1940 and keep fighting. They saw British cities burn and British civilians die, and the British kept fighting. They saw every rational calculation say surrender. None in Britain said no. They're about to discover that the Soviets can be just as stubborn, just as irrational, just as unwilling to accept what mathematics says should happen. But that's a different story. What the generals said after the war, when historians interviewed the surviving German commanders, when their papers were examined, the verdict was unanimous. They were astonished. Not by British military skill, which they respected but didn't fear. Not by British equipment, which they knew was inferior to German in most categories, but by British refusal to accept reality, by British willingness to keep fighting when fighting made no logical sense. General Günther Blumentritt, who served as a senior staff officer, said after the war, "We had been told that Britain was weak, that her empire was hollow, and that her people was soft. Then we saw them fight." General Alfred Jodl, asked during his war crimes trial about the failure to invade Britain, replied with barely hidden frustration, "The British simply would not accept they had lost. We didn't understand it then. I'm not sure we understand it now." November 10th, 1942. Churchill gives a speech in London. The war has turned. El Alamein has been won. Americans are landing in North Africa. The Soviets are about to trap an entire German army at Stalingrad. Victory is not yet certain, but it's conceivable. Churchill delivers a line that will be remembered. This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning. The room erupts in laughter and applause. But beneath the humor lies a deeper truth. Britain didn't win the Battle of Britain because the RAF was larger. It wasn't. It didn't survive the Blitz because British cities were better protected. They weren't. It didn't endure those 2 years alone because its strategic position was sustainable. It wasn't. Britain survived because Churchill and the British people simply refused to accept the script Hitler had written for them. They couldn't win. Not alone. But they could refuse to lose. They could stay in the fight. They could make Germany pay for every mile of sky, for every night of bombing, for every day that passed without British surrender. They could wait for the moment when they wouldn't be alone anymore. The German generals calculated everything: aircraft production, naval strength, industrial capacity, military readiness. And they calculated everything except the one thing that mattered: will. The simple, stubborn, magnificent human will to keep fighting when every rational calculation says stop. They said they didn't understand it. They said it defied strategic logic. They said it was unreasonable. They were right on all counts. And Britain won anyway. Numbers don't tell the whole story. Spreadsheets and logistics matter, but so does the refusal to quit when quitting makes sense. Some victories are won by force. Some are won by simply refusing to lose. If this story of Britain's darkest hour showed you what determination really looks like, hit that subscribe button. We dig deep into the moments when everything hung by a thread, when defeat seemed certain, but something shifted. You smash the like button if you believe willpower can shatter even the best-laid plans. Drop a comment and tell us, what moment in history inspires you to keep going when the odds look impossible? Because here's the truth the German generals learned too late. The person who refuses to accept defeat is their hardest enemy to beat. New videos every week exploring the battles, the decisions, and the people who changed everything. Don't just learn history. Understand what it teaches us about never giving up. See you in the next one.